Hello, John. How you doing? Thank you for coming back onto the channel. This is our episode 14 of the series that we've been doing. So before we begin, I just want to remind the audience that in the description of this video and all of the videos I've been doing with John, there is a link there that will take you to his website that will allow you to sign up for his periodical. You can also do a reading. So please click that link, go to his website and sign up. So, John, thank you again for coming onto the show. A lot has happened since
Oh,
we last spoke.
three
Episode
weeks ago.
13, yeah, it was 3 weeks ago. This is episode 14. So, before we begin, I just want to kind of tell you what I saw on campus during Alumni Day last week.
And
This
what college
is
is it? So for everybody to
this
know,
this was that this is Harvard University.
Harvard.
Yeah, the individuals that have graduated from the university um, can attend Alumni Day. All right. Actually, there are a few days where the reunions happen and they get together. So typically you do the 5 year, the 10 year, the 20 year, reunion. But they invite all graduating classes, but they have special dinners and stuff for the 5, the 10, the 35. We had a class there that goes all the way back to 1945. So it was, of course, they were in wheelchairs; they couldn't walk it, but they, it was nice to see them attending and for everyone to just talk to each other from different generations and just get their different perspectives of their journey through life. So it was a cool event to be at. During that alumni day, that the at the very beginning you line up with your class, with your graduating year, and you march through the yard, and then you sit down, and then you listen to a bunch of speakers. Well, and this is all live streamed, so on YouTube and on different channels. So there was one individual that poured uh, green powder on the president of Harvard, or the interim president, Garber. And she was arrested and she pleaded not guilty, and we'll see what happens with her.
As
She
Kermit
said
the
something
Frog
with,
said, it's not easy being green.
right, right, exactly. So, so she poured all this powder all over the podium, all over the president of Harvard while he was speaking. And his composure was just solid. I mean, he did not flinch at all. Um, and there was a lot of booing that was happening, right? So she's arrested. And then shortly after that, there was about, you got to remember, this is people had to pay for this event. And you had to be you have had to have already graduated. There was about 10 to 15 individuals with banners that did the whole divest, divulge, divest, and then there was other banners talking about genocide in Gaza, right? And they were doing their protest much quieter, much more civil disobedience in this crowd than what I saw actually during the main commencements the week before, which you
Mm,
know about,
mm.
where there was the 1,000 students standing up and screaming, let them walk, and it was a free for all. So they were walking through, and then they walked towards the library, turned, and because the cameras face towards the memorial church, but they also pan over towards the library, which is opposing. They had their signs there right in front of the steps of the library, and then they started to slowly walk towards the stage as if they were going to rush it. So this is where the police come in. So Harvard has security. Harvard also has a police force, and then there's Cambridge police force. So the Harvard police force was there, and they Now you got to remember, they just pulled someone off that poured green powder that no one knows about, what it really is. But so they were kind of supercharged, with it. And they were able to corral them away from the stage as they were slowly trying to storm it. They did that slow walk, but they just, you knew that they were storming the stage as he's talking. And again, the president is not flinching. He just keeps on going. And so there was booing with the crowd. So and eventually the police moved them to the side, and then they moved towards outside the gated area and towards the science center. So, and then I didn't see anything from them again for the rest of the day. It was pretty peaceful after that. They must have been from the 2024 crowd, and they had to have been graduates. They couldn't have been, let's say, the class of 2025 or 2026, right? Because they couldn't have gotten, I mean, it's only family members and grads that had paid for a ticket. So
and
I mean,
gangs of Zionists were invited to beat the kids up.
Right. So all right. So we have so that was my observation, and the difference that I saw was that during the main commencement the week before, the crowd was more in line with the students. So the parents sat peripherally, and the students sat in the center, in the chairs, in the yard, in front of the memorial church. Right. So I would say that majority of the crowd, more than 80%, were aligned with the students that were protesting. It was quite the reverse during the alumni day, the week after, where it's a much older crowd. I would say that the median crowd there was like doing their 35th reunion or older. All right. So, you're talking about people that graduated in 1990 and much farther back, all the way to 1945. So that's the kind of crowd majority that was there. But the sense that I saw was that there was a much more conservative alumni constituency with the older crowd than this modern movement that's taking place at Harvard. So that's just my take on it, independent of some of the people that listen to our show, they're on the conservative side, and some of them are not. And that's why I like having these conversations with you. So we are able to express freely with respect on what these current events mean to the world and to people in the United States, Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, whatever, right? And so that was just my observation, that there did seem to be a difference within, let's say, the Gen X crowd and older versus this newer crowd of graduates that are coming from Harvard.
Well, as you were saying, the 1990, when they go back as far as that, when they were young, graduating, they were graduating in the year officially, the end of the first Cold War was officially ended by Gorbachev and Bush Sr. on a big boat in the Mediterranean in December of 1989. So from 48 to 89, that's the official. A lot of people forget that, and they take it into 92. If that argument is correct, then World War I should have ended in 1923 after the Russian Revolution and after the Turco-Greek War, and all the unraveling that happened, or the Polish fighting the Red Army, but it didn't. So that year, where they were young, they were getting their diploma at a time when, for a lot of them, the diploma really meant something, that it had that they could still kind of afford, although it was getting worse, their degree, that they could eventually pay it off. that that generation was entering the workforce at the beginning of the height of the unipolar hegemonic American era, which is at present in 2024 rapidly declining. And so that generation reaped over 32 years or more, reaped the wealth, the ability of living in a land where our dollar was the reserve currency. Our armies had been victorious. Our air force is overwhelming. Our presumed enemies, the Russians, were crumbling. China was still struggling out of the shock treatment of Mao. The Tiananmen Square had happened in 1989, which was also hard on students, and we could look down upon them then, just like a lot of people who were booing maybe were looking down upon our Tiananmen Square in every square of every major university and beyond in France at the Sorbonne and other places where, they were brutally taken down, not shot down like a lot of people were in Tiananmen Square. And so what we have here is a cycle of a generation that had seen the good of the fruits of American hegemony, the fruits of having everybody kowtow to the United States dollar. And because there was no other choice. I mean, in a way, I'll just drop it in there. Kind of reminds me of 1990, reminds me of the first scenes of The Godfather, with the best scenes before everything goes down. And they're all having a beautiful wedding, and people are saying, and then Luke Grazie said, may you have a male child, and all that too. The Don was at his peak. Everything was fine. People in the movie, like America being the hegemon, said, we'll make you an offer you can't refuse. And those who didn't got a horse head in their bed, like Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi of Libya, for simply the main last straw was that they were openly musing of getting off the dollar. The United States was just formatting its idea of neoconservatism. They were fomenting an idea of how do we, and they were also suffering the shock that they never got over, so they made sure that it never happened again. Peace was very bad for American military industrial complex. It was very bad for business. And so Dick Cheney and Wolfowitz and other people were trying to form up a new philosophy, we don't have Soviet bear to deal with all those many decades, 46 some years. Now that's gone. So now what we need to create an enemy, and create something that would require a security industry that would keep one of our main, most powerful industries, which keeps everybody down in our unipolar world. And so I wrote a lot about this in my 2014 book, which I wrote in the spring of 2014, when I recognized that we were starting a second Cold War, that it would seem Nostradamus's prophecy said would be much shorter and would end hot. And it's called A New Cold War: The Prophecies of Nostradamus, Stormberger, and Edgar Cayce. And I highly recommend you all go to Amazon and look for it. Books by John Hogue. Go to my authors page. If you find any page, and you'll see prompted up all the books that I have. And that one's rather unique because it has a cruise missile at the moment it exploded over a jet. You can't see the jet because it turned into flames, but it's this amazing explosion. And then what I ended up doing with Gail LaForest, my great cover designer from Tranquil Computer, I had her directed to put a cityscape below it. And that flash would have been an aerial burst where the flames would be igniting just underneath it. And even though it was a earthen berm to block from missiles where this jet was parked, it also looked like a desert mountain range. So it looks like the instant that a nuclear flash is happening over a city of like 750 kiloton bomb or something. And I looked at the prophecies of that showed a control group of people who were very accurate about predicting World War I and II, and then World War III, which would happen around the 2020s, I said. But that's a little diversion. I want to stay where I was before I get back to that, because certainly we're on the threshold of World War III like we've never been before. Orders of magnitude. I'm so happy when we're going to talk about Scott Ritter too, because before he tried to get to Russia, he confessed his concerns, and it was an interesting feeling to feel, he said exactly the phrase I've been saying for years, that this situation is orders of magnitude beyond the dangers of the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. And to hear him literally say that, I was like, man, I don't feel so alone now. It's I wish I was hearing everybody talk about it, and I wouldn't be needing to talk about it, and then people would be doing something about it. So, we had come out of the Reagan era with the dividend of ending the Cold War. A lot of it was the economy boomed in the 90s, mainly because we were carpetbagging Russia. We were carpetbagging Russia, just like the Union carpetbagged the South, stripping its resources, changing its political state. Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it has a parallel. And so, we thought we choose because nobody could question us, because there's no other power to rival us, so we could say anything and get away with it. And we didn't look at all the mistakes we made in the Cold War, because winners never do that. This is the curse of winners. They never learn from victory. Therefore, they are doomed to be defeated. It may take a while. It's happening now. The United States did not learn from its victory how to adapt to a new unipolar world. It had no fear of anyone because everybody was a pygmy, militarily speaking. And yet it then let itself go atrophy. I mean, there was one last burst of Cold War I glory when 700,000 US troops and a half dozen other nations from NATO and the Middle East, Syria, Egypt, all came up into a huge coalition to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait in the Persian Gulf War of 1991. And the 6 months prior to it, the Operation Desert Shield, to prevent the spread of Saddam Hussein's armies into northeastern Saudi Arabia, where most of their oil is. So this was a crisis of controlling the oil. That became the new theme for neoconservatives' version of the post-Cold War I world. How we need to make a list of rogue leaders and nations that many of them were our allies during the Cold War. Saddam Hussein was a card-carrying CIA guy, and so many of them were. So the idea is this idea of started to foment that, as if we're to keep our power, finally opening things at the neoconservative manifestos that evolved from that period in 1992 was an open rejection of President John Adams, early president's view that we shouldn't be I'm paraphrasing, we shouldn't be going out in the world to fight dragons and fight people. I mean, the idea is that let's deal with our own sovereignty and not become an empire or anything like that, and live by example, not by, don't do as I do as I say. And the neoconservatives, Wolfowitz and Dick Cheney, were openly saying, no, Don't do as we do as we say or else to the world. So that's the foundation of not learning. The peace dividend was not exploited. For instance, we were in a position to do what currently, as the hegemon is dying out fast, its era, this new emerging multipolar world of the BRICS nations is gathering 3/4 of the world around it, except for the West. And, the West is basically under 1 billion people that are up against 7+ billion people. And you will never know this if you only rely on your regular mainstream media networks. You will be propagandized to not know what huge axis shifting historical moments are undergoing this year every day. You will not know it. You might as well be in the dark ages, the end of the dark ages, in your little mud huts in Europe, a backwater of the world history, while the Arab world in those days, in 1100 and all, and 1000 AD, were at this peak of culture. They were inventing algebra. They were inventing numbers with the Indians. They were creating great art, great literature, a kind of quasi-empire that was not really an empire, but a community that had the link of Islam and Arabic language to connect everyone from the non-Arab Persian Muslims all the way west across North Africa and Middle East and up into Spain, the great culture of the Moors in Spain, the great music that was created. There was a time when the Arab world was at its golden age. That was it. And at that same time, we were a bunch of characters from Monty Python, the Holy Grail. Oh, look, Waldron, I found some new filth over here. You know? Um, and with our kings and lords, when we say too much, doing like Graham Chapman saying, "Be quiet. Will you be quiet?" You know? So that it is the doom of victors that they don't even learn anything, and so it all goes down. Now some empires last longer because they're a little more self-reflective, but the American Empire didn't. It was arrogant, and it had it easy, and so we get to these Gen X's, and so that we're starting to leave, get into college at that time, before, and then they gave birth to the new millennials, the turn of the century, which well, that those people who are part of the establishment do what many people do as they get older. Most of the time, people get more conservative, and it's only rare that some people grow to mature their liberality to a more compassionate and understanding of all people and stuff like that, of how different opinions are there. But I mean, now we are living in a period of time where another cycle that's happening is that it used to be that if there was revolution, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, American Revolution, it was liberals, people who wanted to expand beyond tradition, that were the main firebrands of religion. But what's happening now is the opposite. Populism is the firebrand. Again, the cycle of karmic comeuppance, karmic echoes. Everything that happens at a peak here will return in its mirror image reflection, like Alice in the Looking Glass. It'll always come back backwards than what was done before. The people who got the diploma and had the empire of America, the economic empire, and the weapon of the dollar, profited much from that, whether they were aware of the abuses of it or not. I mean, people in Rome didn't know what was going on in provinces. And our empire has been unique in that it is not an empire like the Western European empires had been, where you knew it was empire because the British and the French and the Germans had garrisons there. They were, policing the peoples, brown and black peoples of their colonies, and brazenly, openly taking their wealth from them, and at not a fair price, because there was a lot of racial overtones over that. The white man's burden, as was called, um, was alive and well with German imperialism, British imperialism, and American imperialism. But Americans did a little different thing, being that we're kind of money oriented and business oriented. And we're a young country that broke from all that European way of conquering and taking lands and stuff, which had been, Europe. That is why Europe is the most blood-soaked continent in history. Orders of magnitude beyond any other continent. I even saw a map recently. Somebody finally made a black map outlined in white of all the countries, all the areas of Earth, and every battle was a little white dot put into this map. And even though there were a lot of dots in other places and a lot of dots in the Middle East, Europe was white with dots. It was like, meh. Everything else is a little more breathing space. The black was peace, I guess. And the other country that, for its short lifespan, given the Civil War battles and the Revolutionary battles, the Indian battles, was surprisingly full of dots, especially above and below the Mason-Dixon line of states of the Union and the Confederacy. A lot of dots. So as a new world country, we got deep into our violence, pretty deep, almost to compete with the Europeans, because we were Europeans, and who came in. So this there's a way of looking at history, if you can look at it not ignoring the personal impact of it, but if you can look at it transpersonally, as a meditator, as a witness to it, as you're living it. You're part of the world. You are the world, in fact, as some mystics would say. But there's a part of us that is never touched by any of this. It lives through it, it passes through it, it watches this temporary body mind react, love certain things that are happening, hate certain things that are happening, have a moral integrity or an immoral integrity, in lack of integrity. But there is in everyone a deep, profound, non-existing, therefore it is not non-existing. It is something that is not burdened by that even. It is there. It is there when all your terms of right and wrong and good and evil and all of that don't touch it. But from it can be the source of immense love and beauty by using the temporary body mind. A lot of wisdom is happening when it's there without an effort. And it is this kind of mystery, the more that people can do techniques of relaxation to bring themselves into this eternity of the present and slow down and relax into the moment, one breath and moment at a time, it tends to redirect all this beautiful temporary experience we're all either enjoying or hating, that's called life, life of, I like to call it, I'm talking about the depth of the ocean is not the all the stuff that's playing on its surface, rising and falling as waves, a universe wave here, a cosmos wave there, a human being there, a dinosaur there, a war there, a beautiful building of a unipolar empire, and the current collapse of its economy for the very hubris of applying the US dollar more and more as a weapon of control rather than a welcoming of, well, come to the dollar because you'll become richer, your world will become more developed. This dollar is solid. We're never going to betray you by getting in there and saying, oh, we don't like what you're doing over there, and if you don't stop, we'll pull the dollar away from you. We'll sanction what you're doing. There has been a more clever and insidious way that America has been a an, an empire of economy more than even military. In fact, we were letting that incredible NATO military of the Cold War, it had, like I was saying earlier, it had its last blast of glory. 700,000 Americans, another 100,000 of other peoples. It was this huge. NATO went to the desert and defeated a little third world army of Iraq, made of a bunch of reservists and conscripts, we were at our peak. But that was it. After that, we started to get into the habit is, well, there's just never going to be another world war. There's never going to be another big war. It's going to be all these colonial wars, you know, just like the British had to fight in Afghanistan when it was an empire and lost its empire in Afghanistan. Now we got caught up in Afghanistan too and lost our empire there. It happened at the same time. We had to fight the little ragheads under the rocks. All is, has a very racist version of it. It's subhuman people, subcultures that the white man's burden or the American multicolored hegemon's burden were there to control and educate and turn into. It's like that great line from Full Metal Jacket when the Marine general is seeing the guy with the peace. Martin Muldoon, actor, with a peace sign on his helmet cover, and he made this statement, which was, are you going to get up with the program? Are you going to fight with the team? I mean, when it comes down to it, inside every gook is an American trying to break out. you know, it's just like he would be the same guy who actually did say, we had to destroy that village to save it, which after Vietnam and after we became a hegemon became, we have to destroy that country to save it. Hear me out, Libya. Hear me out, the ruins of Belgorod or Belgrade in Serbia after what, 75 days of bombing, nights of bombing from NATO, who always says it's a defensive organization, but it broke its charter and fought what the Nuremberg trials said was the ultimate crime against humanity that should have got our leaders hung like the Nazis. Fighting the Nazi leaders that survived and killed themselves in Nuremberg before they were put in jail. All of those people had waged what was called aggressive war, a war that where you just decided you were just going to rape and pillage and go into somebody else's country. And if there were certain races there that you didn't think were worthy of existence, wiping them out. And that's what these guys did. And most of them had served 20-year terms. Hess was a life sentence. So I think he was strangled when they got tired of living so long. And what the neoconservatives were getting into is no, we will make wars of choice. We will to make sure that the oil industries of the world, which are for us, we're not going to do deals with them. We're going to control them. we're going to, if they don't follow what we do, we will control the oil industry. So we had this little list. We had Somalia, we had other countries, but the main ones were Syria, because our list was also guided to, it's really hard to know who runs who these days. And it was always developing. Even during our period of hegemonic power, we were we were very much manipulated by Israel. And I understand why. I mean, I get the game. It's like if you're a little country and you've decided to, and openly quotes, it's quoted all through the Zionist movement from its inception to all Israel's leaders, some of my favorites like Moshe Dayan and all, with the eye patch and gold in my ear. And we've talked about this before, but the reality that's catching out now is that Israel was created as a robbery, a rape of another group of people that were there. No, not too different from what the United States did to Native Americans. And so it's a karmic attraction that America and Israel are together because we got away with genocide. Don't believe me? Read Samuel book 1 and 2 of the Bible. Read what Netanyahu on October 7th was in a rage about this. How dare the Warsaw Ghetto erupt and break out of into where the Nazis were in? Oh, I'm sorry, we're not in Warsaw, are we? We're in the other open air prison called the Gaza Strip, which is also surrounded by troops. It's an open air prison. And oh, what did they do after being dehumanized for 40 years? They broke out, they fought back, and the disdain and shock and horror and disgust of a lot of Zionists running Israel who made this open air prison were almost verbatim saying the same things the SS commanders were saying to Hitler about how dare these Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto start shooting at us, killing our people. And so it was there has always been an evil at the core of this, something that's always going to hatch out. If you come to a land and exploit it and take it from the people that are there, there will be consequences. We're going to face the same consequences in America too for that. And so this is some of the things that are part of why there's kids slowly moving off the steps of that place with their banners, trying to get in to make a move on the podium. And I'm kind of glad. I used to be in security, so I understand. I used to do security on the Osho commune. I was part of Rajneesh security, so I understand crowd control. We had someday I'll have to tell you the story about where we almost had a riot with outsiders, and I had to stand in the line and just be there and keep somebody. And then this one guy thought I was a softie, so he thought he was going to get into my nose and get it going, and I gave him nothing, no energy at all, to where he had nowhere to go with it. So he just went, But if I had responded and reacted, we would have had a big riot stick problem on our hands, and I would have been right in the middle of it. So that's just one thing, and other things happen, like when some people used to start committing acts of terror, like shooting at our people on the riverbank and stuff like that. I should tell those stories about me being a security guard in Rajneeshpuram some other day. But I've been in security, so um, the guys did right. They didn't. In that case, the police did not pull out their sticks and beat people up, but they made a force, a hara-like wall of energy that said, "Don't go further than this, but you can come over here." And that was right, because that would have been too far, I think. Of course, everybody has a different tolerance level. Some people don't even, one of the tolerance levels that was completely thrown out the window, that just happened, I think, yesterday, when 4 hostages were liberated from Hamas. is that I'm watching more and more is coming out of that Palestinian camp. Um, there may have been 1,000 Palestinians killed and wounded in that. I mean, they were just. Even Scott Ritter, who we'll be talking about, was saying what they did was terrible. They went beyond the levels of because you know they're they're acting like the Germans did to Jews. And now they're acting, some people in the Zionist movement are acting to the seed of Abraham, which is equally Arab and Palestinian. They are acting the same manner. And so there are so many things that have happened. But I would just, they're swirling around in my head that beg me to say something about what's happened in the last 3 weeks. But I think I try to keep this swirl of what wants to be heard to a bigger picture. And the bigger picture to get from this is that those people who were back in 1990 getting their diploma, if they've lived this far, they've lived this far to see the full cycle of that empire rise and fall. And now the world is no longer wanting it anymore. It's the US dollar has been so abused by Americans against others when it could have been the thing. I mean, if you want to have everybody eating from your hands, why not be positive and welcoming? Why not be like the Chinese are right now? I mean, why do you think that all those years that Saudi Arabia and Iran were were almost at war over the Persian Gulf, and all attempts to bring them together just didn't happen until Xi Jinping. He just comes in a weekend, from some other part of the world that's not got any baggage, and a part of the world that if you actually heard what they were saying rather than what the frightened bunny rabbits of mainstream media are saying, bug-eyed bunny rabbits of the media, the Chinese are about stability and harmony. The Chinese are not us. They don't perpetuate chaos to bring control. They don't use money as a weapon to keep you in under control according to our ideas. They are strangely similar to us as being isolationists, but they take their isolationism in a different way. I mean, they just want to have their middle earth, their middle world as it is. What we did as isolationists, but they want to do business, and Chinese love to do business and build silk roads and all that like before, and they're doing it, and in a way having to do it because America over the last hegemonic few decades has been putting its navy around Taiwan, floating it through Taiwan, even after it had acknowledged in 1979 and signed it, and you can still find it on the State Department's pages, that the declaration that America made under President Carter, that they acknowledge that there's one China and Taiwan is part of it, not separate. The Taiwanese are just as Chinese as the mainland, and they were once a part of that until the Japanese invaded the island and took it, and turned it into a colony of subservient Chinese to work over the militant Japanese imperium, just like what happened to Korea with Japanese, and Manchukuo, which was Manchuria. People have been taking pieces off China since the 1840s, and all of that took a dark century to end with the Red Chinese victorious against the nationalists in the Civil War that happened after World War II, 1949. And so then started another difficult century of transformation because a lot of things that happened were terrible in Mao's China. it didn't work. And the biggest problem was that, and Deng Xiaoping, who succeeded Mao, was a visionary. He understood that something that even Karl Marx says in Das Kapital. That's why the key of any successful um, political system, whether it's capitalist or not, is to have capital. You know, if Karl Marx had seen Russia become a communist state, he would have been, whoa, well, that surprises me, because according to my book, Das Kapital, I predicted the only nations that could best become socialist and finally communist are America and the British Empire, because they have capital to do it. They have wealth to share. And without wealth to share and ability to make wealth to share, communism will only share poverty and ultimately will fail. And the Soviet Union proved that because they didn't have capital. They went a lot farther than anybody could think, but the thing that killed them was they tried to match the United States in a weapons war in the Cold War, and finally bankrupt them. So capital is to be able to have the wealth. Every country to succeed has to create wealth. And then there has to be a way to find a way to share it. Now, the Chinese are the first communists to get it right, according to Karl Marx. The Chinese, in a unique Confucian way, it's Confucian communism. It's not Marxist-Leninist communism. I just have to qualify with that. It's the Chinese version of, because China is generally less so focused on me and the individual, and more focused of me as part of the greater community. So it's like my Oriental teacher in high school said, stayed with me. She was on a beach with all of these Chinese women friends from the university. I think she was in Taipei University, and so she noticed certain things you never hear Western people do. When Western people go to a beach, they got their families or just their friends and just a few people or just on their own. They just go to the beach and be there in the beach. But her students were saying, let's all walk down the beach together. I mean, it's just a slight different perception. And it really stood with me. It's just like people of China have a more of a consciousness of the whole body of the community. And there is always in China a desire to seek harmony. That is to find some two things that are in dissonance can be brought into harmony. In fact, in a musical context, since it's a higher language than words, if any of you have seen the movie Baraka, um, it's a marvelous movie of meditation. It's got this little Indian Amazonian kid, and it's in it, and it starts off with these beautiful shots with Indian flute playing, going ooh, ooh, ooh. Eagle flies and then let be, ooh, and it just pulls you right in. There's no words in it, just music and images, just like Koyaanisqatsi was the original version of this kind of cinema phenomenon. And it takes you Baraka is I believe it is, in fact, if people don't know this, because you wonder how that incredible beautiful music of Michael Stearns, what he's doing in that music. I mean, there's a scene where the monkey's in the Japanese hot springs, and he looks like he's meditating like a Buddha. He's probably just falling asleep because it's nice and warm and it's in the winter in the hot tub. And then suddenly they show this beautiful shot. It's kind of diffused by overcast, but it was on Mauna Loa. It was taken, where you see this bronze like ring of the shadow of Earth in the eclipse. And then you see BA, RA, K. It took me a long time to realize because it's very subtle. Those choruses are singing ba, ka, ka, which means blessing of the divine.
Mm.
And in Arabic, baraka. And it's where barat, you have it's also in Hebrew in a different, slightly different form. So the thing you'll hear, there's this beautiful part with these waves of sound, and they're quivering. It kind of goes, ooh, 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 ooh. And it is actually, in its simplicity, as a music person, the space between, it's a major and minor, it's a harmony and a dissonance. And so the two are polarized, but if they play in perfect measure, there's a third possibility that embraces dissonance and harmony as a deeper harmony, you know. And if you take that all the way into many things, that the music of the spheres, the music, the vibration that's in all things, in our apparent wave-like world, rising and falling waves of creation and all, there is a connection even between evil and good, and wars and peace, and uh, construction and destruction, that that is witnessed by this mystery in us that's eternal, that never is born and never dies. It just visits this. It's just like the ocean suddenly comes up in the shape of a wave to experience life as a wave, slapping other waves, hugging other waves, going with great wave oceans to seek the shore and never being able to get on the shore, always thrown back into the ocean. All this waving, war waves, soft waves, peace waves, all is a wave in this great samsara. Um, and this wheel of life and death, good and evil, hunger and satiety, is spinning around a central point of pure no thingness. And this no thingness is the very source of all eternity. It is like that which happens can only happen by spinning around that which is even free of existing or not existing. And that source, very ubiquitously, absolutely ordinary in its miraculousness, is so hard for the ego to find because the mind and the ego can't find it. Their very nature is to go looking for something that's already there, and they'll never find it. So the deeper answer to all these things I've just touched upon a little bit about the risings and fallings is to find that thing, to see how absolutely ubiquitous it is. It's everywhere. It's so ordinary that you can't even see it. Like, it's like the sea. If a baby fish is told that he lives in an ocean, he says, well, I gotta find that ocean because I don't see any ocean. I just see nothing around me. So he goes looking for the ocean. He's completely frustrated because wherever he goes, it's just water, and he can never find this thing called the ocean until he's thrown out of the ocean, either by getting hooked or something, and then he somehow manages not to be eaten and goes flopping back through the gunwale into the ocean. And then when he's back in that ocean, and when he goes splash back, he goes, the ocean. No one can find it. We are it. We can't find it. the thing that never changes in us, it's always aware of all this, is the source of everything, is everywhere and nowhere at once. It can't. So gaining a knack, living the dialectic life, right, wrong, good, bad, this, that. Give you an example. My teacher Osho said this. He said, if if do you notice, asking all of us, I mean, I remember when you were a child, and now I was a child, now I'm becoming an old man with a white beard. And what recognizes that doesn't change. And if it wasn't there, this thing that is free of varying and not varying, you would never know, like an animal. There would not be a sentience. An animal never knows. It just lives its life. It's just whatever's happening, and it lives its life innocently, but it has no sense of change, not a conscious awareness of it. I mean, it might go, well, it's just here now. Oh, here's now a hyena's chasing me, and it's going to be his dinner. What do I do? And it has that side of it, but the sentience, when the mystery starts to become self-aware of itself, is a unique thing that has taken 4 billion years for this life on this planet to create a situation, a milieu that would allow sentience to happen here. And that's why it's so important not to blow up this world. Because if we do, maybe it takes another 4 billion years to get to this point again. And I will just have to move on now to something that's actually more pressing. Although we'll get back to the theme of this because there's a lot going on in Israel right now. A lot. One of the things that we'll talk about is that Benny Gantz has left the emergency government. It is well, the press is saying it will collapse, and Netanyahu now has to do an open election, a snap election, to see if he can stay. And now there are many people in the press saying, okay, his attempt to avoid his crimes and not be put in prison for them is to perpetuate this war. I've been talking to some sources. One of them is somebody who used to work at length at Mondoweiss, which is a very good news agency in related to the Middle East. And he opened my eyes a lot about Netanyahu. I mean, I'm going to look at a kind of beyond the black and white about the man. Um, you know, nobody likes him in Israel. Very few. But Israelis, a lot of Israelis, I contend, realize that he's the only guy, warts and all, that can they believe him about bringing total victory in this situation. And since Israel's population has gotten way to the right since the earlier days, and they've seen Benny Gantz try to form a government. He can't. They've seen Naftali Bennett try to form a government. Can't. Who's been the longest lasting prime minister in Israeli short history? Benjamin Netanyahu. Who can cat herd all those right-wing Likud and more extreme people? Who's actually the moderate in the room with all those Ben Gavirs and Shmolich and all those nut jobs who are really extreme, openly, let's kill all of them, let's kill those Palestinians, let's stamp them out. And it's Netanyahu. So, I mean, it's more complicated. He's a survivor and a political animal, of which is rare in human history. I mean, I've come to grudgingly respect his ability to survive, which and I imagine Benny Gantz did not time this very well because he actually delayed his announcement until today because of the thing that really people were watching, that we got some hostages out. Oh yeah, we killed hundreds of Palestinians, but they're just Palestinians anyway, which is a feeling a lot is in the majority in Israel right now. So that Netanyahu's going to say, trust me, it's a tough thing we're doing, but we're going to go to total victory. We're finally going to get rid of this Palestinian question. And I think that he'll probably win with 62 seats in this election. And Benny Gantz will once again not be showing that he cannot run a government. So people don't like the guy, but he runs a government, and you don't want to break up a government when you send 50,000 more reservists to face Hezbollah in the north. You don't do what happened. Remember those few years, 3 years or so, with Israeli, he was just, Netanyahu kind of was still governing for a while until Naftali Bennett did it for a bit. But even he fell back and Netanyahu came back because you don't want to have so he's the leader. Doesn't matter. It's a tribal issue. It's like, it's about our tribe in this hostile land. I mean, who liked Saul? Really? I mean, who liked King Saul, the first king of the Jews? I mean, he was kind of a Netanyahu character. Maybe he's a reincarnate Netanyahu. I don't know. And Samuel comes out without anybody questioning him, and he says, "Go kill all those people. Kill the men, kill the virgin girls, take the babies out of the arms of the mothers and before them, kill them, kill the livestock. Don't take any of the property of the livestock." And when Saul bought and sold the best of the livestock, and Samuel said, I screwed up with you, basically, if I put it in modern language. I'm in trouble with the Lord now because you broke the covenant, you broke it. He didn't care that he killed people. They don't matter. But you know, buying and selling the unclean buffaloes and goats and stuff, that's a terrible crime. The people, schmeeple, who cares? They're not people. They're, as uh, Gallant, the Secretary of Defense, says, they're just animals. They're all a bunch of animals. So on the day after all that stuff happened on 8th October, he said, "You're just all animals. We will cut off their power. We will cut off their water. We'll cut off their food." And his eyes, and so they will give us back the hostages. That's just a no. That's just an excuse to all those, by the way, are crimes against humanity. The ICJ is right. All these these leaders of this government are actually solidly committing genocide, and the whole world's starting to turn against America and Israel because America is enabling it. And there's that strange karma. We are the two nations in history that thus far have gotten away with our holocausts on other people. The Moabites, Canaanites, the Amalekites, even written in the Bible. Yep, we did that. What God told us to. What are you going to say about that? Of course, the problem with the Bible and a lot of the things that it says, for instance, it gives I think in Leviticus or I think it's in Deuteronomy, where I think Moses gives all the terms of what makes an accurate prophet. And one of the things is the accurate prophet is always right. There's just one problem with this argument. If you killed all the Amalekites and the Canaanites and the Moabites, who were your neighbors, and they also had profits, and they also might have disagreed with you. If you're the only one left standing, if all your competitors have been killed by you, you could say anything you like. There's no one to go, no, you weren't right about that prediction or that prediction. So basically it means that it's a non sequitur. Any of those biblical treaties to what is an accurate prophet or not are useless because there's no counterbalancing critique. It's just God told me to do that. Well, God told George W. Bush to invade Iraq. How did that go? An act of aggressive warfare. So, but I think it's an important thing about one last thing about all that's changed since 1990 and 2024 is Strauss and Howe, really good futurologists, wrote The Fourth Turning, and a very important book to read. It's an 80-year cycle of generations, which are 20 years. So where, the first turning is after a fourth turning crisis. It's usually more anchored to the Anglo-Saxon and American world, which means their theory, since we're no longer in the center of the world soon, they're going to have to come up with another theory that looks at Eurasians, global South cycles, rather than the cycle that's been so strong during this 248 years of one orbit of Pluto, from the birth of the United States to today. And we are kind of those Anglo-Saxons that got away from that part of the world and were able to then found a new kind of constitution that was very mindful of all the lack of freedoms in Europe that made everybody come to America to escape that, which are embedded in our Bill of Rights and all these things. It's what makes the Constitution so amazing. And so the Strauss and Howe talked about how the millennials talked a lot of great things about the millennials, but they only gave one page because they said, well, we can't just do nothing but gushing positivity about it. So that one page in the book on the fourth turning, unfortunately, most everything that was stated on that page ended up being what the new millennials were doing. They tended to be more at ease with people taking freedoms away as long as they had their TikTok and they had their stuff and they had their pleasures, their computer games and all that. Then, so there was this potential of the new millennials to not care much about democracy and just don't get into my life. Let me just live my life. I don't even want to deal with politics. But their children, the Gen Z, they were right about that. They said these people would be like the kids in the 60s. And they would be more than, in the 60s, there were issues. It was like we were demonstrating because we didn't want to be drafted to go to war. It was right to demonstrate against that because at the time, American kids and adults, well, mostly the kids, knew their rights. And they knew that you can't go to war unless Congress declares a war. We haven't done that since World War II. So all of our wars since then have been constitutionally illegal. Our police actions. You hide behind the UN to get into Korea. That's what True Monkey did. Truman. My master used to call him True Monkey. At first I didn't like that. But then I learned more about Mr. Truman, how his motivation for destroying 2 Japanese cities with atomic weapons had nothing to do with ending the war with Japan. We had been withholding them agreeing to their terms for 6 months. The Japanese, after the Battle of Berlin and Nazi Germany's fall, they were already saying, we want to get out of this war. We had just one condition: leave our emperor alone, let him sit on his throne. He can have no power or whatever, but because of this is the whole center of the Japanese society. And It wasn't the atomic bombs that pushed Japan to let it all go, and it was also not the West. The Secretary of State of that time was also very much pressured by the fact that people didn't want to fight the war. A lot of people wanted to go home, and so at last the white racists who were in power said, "Okay, okay, let your emperor have his throne." But all could have been ended 6 months early with millions of people saved from their lives destroyed and cities blown up by atomic weapons. That bombing was done on schedule for the Potsdam Conference so that Truman could tell Stalin to his face that we have this ultimate weapon and we're the only ones that have it. Well, kind of a push of saying, don't cross too many lines with us. As you know, the alliance was beginning to show stresses. And Stalin just had his pipe. He was puffing, going, interesting. And Truman was shocked. It didn't have any effect on him. Of course, what naive Truman didn't know, and most of the Americans didn't know, we Stalin knew about the Manhattan Project. He had agents there. I think Enrico Fermi was kind of spilling the beans, and there was also people in Alamogordo, New Mexico. So, and I could understand why, because Stalin immediately understood what the bomb was, and if only one country had one and built a bunch of them, they could, in the name of democracy, do the most egregious tyrannical acts for the necessary evil on other nations. So, and I think the people that sneaked some of that material to the Russians, well, their motivations were clear later on. Ones that survived it, they said, we didn't want one country having this terrible weapon. It had to be counterbalanced. Because I can tell you that it's all coming out in Freedom of Information Act that after the end of World War II, there were when America only had the atomic bomb, there were think tanks that were drawing out plans for a limited nuclear war and invasion of the forming NATO that would break up Russia and end the Soviet Union before the Soviets got the bomb. I've seen the maps, I've seen the plans.
I just have one question. I just have
Mhm.
one question. Did did they obtain material that was already centrifuged, or did they do their own centrifuging in Russia?
I don't
Do you know?
know. I don't know if I would think what I know is that they knew the theories. They probably had some of the formulas. And I think Sakharov and those people, Russians are incredibly industrious.
Hmm. Some of the best engineers I've ever met were
Oh,
Russian,
amazing.
actually.
And now, even more so, new Russia is very different from what people are seeing. I mean, I'm just looking at the SPIEF. There's been this huge world trade conference that's happened in St. Petersburg. In this huge skyscraper that's the tallest building in Europe. It looks like a giant narrow diamond. And it's right on the coast of St. Petersburg. And they've been holding all the meetings with these views out the back and stuff. Incredible architecture. You know that it's finally coming around that Russia's economy has always been undervalued through bias. And now that it can't be, now that the dollar is not frightening a lot of
Mhm.
people anymore to say things like that because you get sanctioned for it. Um, the Russian economy is very close. It's the fourth largest in the world. Now, they used to be saying even just a few years ago that it was as big as New York City. And that's clearly BS. If anybody's actually looked at the new Russia and look at what they're doing there, that's certainly not just New York City, you know. And the so the it it's looking like they've miscalculated that there's tens of trillions of dollars of capital in Russia that the Western world was not looking at. that, you know, these sanctions were clearly, they saw them coming, and they made sure that they were, for 8 years they were waiting for this to happen. And since the ruble at that time was not a currency like the United States, it depends on other people using it outside of the United States. If more dollars are outside of the United States, no, they used the ruble, and the ruble was used very successfully within Russia. So it had no effect. Um, in fact, even their own financial people, like the Galbu Balinia, who's the head of the economy there, did the reforms. She was like shaking her shoes, saying, "What's going to happen with this sanction? They freeze our assets and all of that." But what happened even blew her away. It's like, my God, our economy's strong. It actually got stronger, and Europe's got weaker because you don't. They were telling Biden's people this. Even the Fed was telling him this, but they ignored what they were saying. Even Ursula von der Leyen, heading the EU, was being told by financiers in Europe, look, Russia is the Saudi Arabia of commodities. If you freeze their economy, for instance, one of the things that was going around, they were saying, well, Taiwan was saying, well, we won't take your, we will ban, we won't give you our chips. And Russia shrugs and says, okay, then we won't give you the sand that's only coming from Russia that makes you possible to make them. There's always been this BS idea in the world economy since World War II that commodities are secondary to currency, that currency is a value unto itself. And these are the same people that in 1971 dropped all reserve value off a piece of paper, the fiat economy. But even the United States anchored its dollar on the Saudi Arabian petrodollar. And it was all these years. The caveat was that when you buy from us, it's only in US dollars, and you buy treasury bonds, US treasury bonds. Well, in 2023, the Saudis stopped. They said, no more of this. They wanted saw the way the winds of the future changing back to a Eurasian-centered world, and they started selling to yuan, Chinese yuan, and stopped selling the dollar, stopped buying bonds. And it's the biggest story that people in America are not hearing, to what extent the world, as rapidly as I predicted, I said it would take about 24 months when it really started sliding, the amount of people pulling away from the dollar, pulling their money out of US banks, because anybody who can freeze a country that now we're discovering is the size of the fourth largest economy on the planet, very close to being number 3. If we could do that to that economy, what about little Argentina? What about Bolivia? What about Europe or any country in the world that's not as small compared to that? So people started to pull their money very quietly out of there. China has been dropping US bonds and selling it off to other countries, about $1 trillion, I think, this year. And so what's happening is this whole, we can spend whatever we like because we just make the money, because we're the currency of the world. Well, you're not anymore. There's going to be, before October, and probably at October, in the Kazan convention of the BRICS that's meeting, with Russia this year as the president of the BRICS. South Africa was last year. You're going to see they've already got the idea going, and they're going to present it. They might present it before the meeting in October, where they're going to show how it works, where it's the kind of system that the Bretton Woods people in 1944 initially were going to try to do. But they decided in the end to tag the world currency reserve on the United States, because really it was the last economy standing. Everybody was devastated. even Soviet Union, everybody. And so they went the easy route, but the not very smart route, because what that meant is if any country is the currency of the world, it will eventually rule the world, and not too wisely, as we have done. Eventually it happened. This one is not ruled by anyone. It's kind of sounds to me like a SWIFT system that's a kind of intermediate currency, which all the currencies of the BRICS nations are pooled together as a pool of value. And it's a it takes the dominant. That means you will not have sanctions in that kind of world. This is the kind of world. I mean, when the Chinese came in, like I was saying earlier, Xi Jinping in one weekend solved the enmity, the animus between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And now they're part of the BRICS. Now they're working together. The Chinese just came in and brought harmony. They bring in peace. They build roads, they build train systems they invest, but it's not an investment like we do. I mean, please, folks in America and Europe, please, when you hear this news, understand this media that you watch in mainstream is they project the white man's racism of colonial powers onto Russia, onto China, that is their demons reflected back on them, not the Chinese, not the Russians. One of the reasons why Russia is hated so much, there's two reasons. It's hated obsessively by the Western world and Europe because, as Dostoevsky, a great Russian novelist, said, when asked why is somebody so hated by others? He said, well, because these others did some deep crime against them, a deep outrage. And so they vent their anger, throw it at the victim when it's really self-hate, unconsciously self-hate. They just throw it at the victor. Now, at the victim. Now, the other reason why Russia is hated is that it's never been conquered. And the third reason why they just can't stand the Russians, because it shows how morally bankrupt the haters are. You name me in history one instant when Russia unilaterally decided, like Napoleon, to march into Europe and conquer it. A war of aggression, pure conquest, just because it wanted to take the resources of Europe and sublimate its populations. You will not find it. The Russians have never done that. Sometimes Russia's armies, in alliance with other European armies, like in the Napoleonic Wars, in 8 coalitions against Napoleon, wanted to defeat Napoleon and his armies, but never unilaterally, always with allies, always with Prussians and Austrians and Bernadotte Swedes and all of that, and to defeat the bad sides of the French Revolution that Napoleon was spreading in his dictatorship. So if you look at history, you will find that it is us. We hate them because every time we try to destroy them, since the 12th, 13th century, when the Teutonic Knights tried to destroy Novgorod and Pskov, I can't say that word. Today I can't say that Russian word. It's a town. Maybe that's Alzheimer's starting. I don't know. Pskov. Pskov. There it is. I did it. It's a P F Scott in it. Anyway, so they tried it. Eisenstein's great movie showing what happened to them, where they all sank in the lake fighting Alexander Nevsky. With an incredible score by Prokofiev. That was the first. Then Charles XII in the Great Northern War in the 1700s tried to defeat Peter the Great and the Russians. The Livonian alliance of Lithuania and Poland almost in the time of troubles, almost conquered everything up to Moscow. They were eventually thrown out. That was the hardest. They were thrown out. Then Napoleon in 1812 amassed 20 nations of Europe with the French to go into Russia, and they were utterly destroyed. Then Hitler, with a whole lot of European nations behind him, including the Pope, who called the invasion of Soviet Union a crusade for Christendom. That was Pius XII. Of course, he was blindly anti-communist to the point where he would blindly let Ante Pavlich and other war criminals, because they were fighting against the communists, he'd look the other way when they were slaughtering 800,000 Serbs, civilians, or things like that. And he even helped him hid him out in Castel Gandolfo, the summer residence of the Pope, so that he wouldn't be caught by the Nuremberg trial. All the rat lines you will notice. Strangely enough, you will notice that a lot of the leaders of the Holocaust, the Germans who led the Holocaust, all grew up being conditioned by Catholic priests. Hitler was Catholic, boy. Heydrich, all these, it's almost all Catholics. And a lot of the Catholic war criminals of the SS through the Odessa lines and the rat lines, that's how they used the Catholic Church to get to Argentina and South America. So, but it's only because they were anti-communists that the Pope would be blind to their crimes. But that doesn't make them go away. Anyway, so the we have a world that keeps moving, keeps changing. And frankly, if one does not have a center growing of this eternal spark, it's very hard to at least better understand why it's going like this. So I contend. Now, I'm going to move on now to, you were asking me about, we talked a little bit about what's happening in the Middle East just in the last 24 hours, right? Actually, there was the attack. Initially, it was 200. Now the numbers are rising to 1,000 were killed in this massacre to get these 4 people. Interestingly enough, Noah, the girl who famously was on the back of a bike on October 7th, reaching out, she's in her Israeli uniform, so she's a POW. She's reaching out, going, help, as they're driving off. Everybody remembers that if you've seen any of it. But fortunately for her, she was released. But it's the same story of the people that are released, and this is much later than the first initial stories, but it's the same stories that get corroborated by the people when they're released, when they're put on camera. They're no longer got Hamas people around them. Their fear was the Israelis killing them. You know, the Hannibal directive. It's one of the biggest lies that's being put out there, and eventually it'll come out that all this Netanyahu's rage and outrage at what the Palestinians breaking out of the prison they made them, forced them to live in, never letting them out, never giving them a chance to get decent health care, never giving them the freedom of travel, privacy, all the things we take for granted. You think that doesn't turn a person into a barbarian of anger and rage? Well, if you treat people like animals, they will respond like wild animals. And why not? Wouldn't you? Wouldn't I? If put in such a place where no humanity was given, we weren't even considered human beings. Cut off your water, cut off your food. And when you've got food and water, it's always rationed. Just enough. Hopefully they call it the Gaza diet in Gaza, where the food that finally did get in, even when the prison was not in a prison riot, it was always substandard calorie intake just to kind of weaken them, make it harder. And frankly, this ongoing famine that's going on that you won't hear about, and actually, if the Hezbollah war thing expands this conflict, um, um, the food's not getting to the people. That idiotic $300 million dock. I never understood that dock. It's only this high above the water. And any simple wave is going to screw
I
up.
think it was just built just as a PR stunt.
It was. Well, and then there's one truck there, and people have to go all the way out to get it. There are trucks, thousands of trucks lined up in Egypt and other places ready to get in. But the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, they make every kind of way to slow it down. They even allow Zionists from the West Bank to actually corral the Philadelphia corridor, and I've watched them push over trucks, throw the food in the dirt. They're there to prevent food from getting to these people. We have 1.3 million people that need 500 trucks a day in North Gaza, another 500 in the south end, center end. They're only getting 15. Do the math, everybody. And if you watch what gets out of the Gaza Strip, you'll notice people are getting thinner. And those are the ones that can still move around. I mean, the thing that's so insidious about famine is when it really takes hold, all the people like your pet cat or something that finally goes off somewhere to die under a bush somewhere. They go off to die in their bedrooms or in the ruins. You don't, they disappear. Suddenly there's nobody there. I think frankly, I think the death toll is way beyond 35,000. And of course, there's no way to record it now because the Israelis systematically destroyed all the records, all the libraries, all the records of the hospitals they destroyed before they lined up the doctors and nurses and shot them in the cooler rooms, in the icebox rooms, and then put them in a mass grave, and then that they're digging up. That's just God. It's good to know that a majority of Jews are against what Zionists are doing in their name. And I'm being part Jewish myself. I'm like, my God. And Israel, not even getting to what's going on in Ukraine yet. If I lose the thread again, I'll just say it. Around the 23rd and the 28th of last month, something was done that if you did that in the Cuban Missile Crisis or at any time during the first Cold War, you would have had a thermonuclear exchange. These Portuguese-made, British probably piloted large drones, a series of them made long-distance attacks on the early warning radar systems of Russia at Almaty or Alvarty or something is in Krasnodar, and then farther deep into Russia, about 1,000 kilometers in, at Orienburg. They put holes in the outer walls of it. It's possible they put them down for an hour, but what they've done is taken 20% of the 10 towers that can look way over the horizon at a nuclear strike coming. So the Ukrainians may have plotted the course, but since these are British guided things, and this is the thing that's been happening is that, Ukraine has no satellite links that makes them able to plot these cities being bombed deep in Russia. These are Americans, French, and British. They have the satellites. They have the high tech. The Ukrainian grunt down there, he gets the call from the NATO officers. He punches in the code. Most of the time doesn't even know where the drone's going to be launched or the missile fired, the ATACMS or the snow snow shadow or whatever it's called, the British and the Scalp cruise missiles that are French. The Russians, we're all alive today because of Vladimir Putin's cool head and his Security Council, some of the most talented bureaucrats on the planet who are faced with their opposites in the West, who are some of the most infantile, immature people that have ever wielded power. I've never seen more stupid people wielding power who believe their own propaganda and they have nuclear powers. I mean, even the dumb leaders of 1914 that stepped into World War I were Einsteins compared to these pieces of work that are, Mr. Biden sitting in invisible chairs, turning his back. And so everybody else in the Normandy thing turned their back. I mean, come on, folks, this man needs to be in an old folks home. You do not put that kind of a man in office, but he's there. This is the infantility that America is suffering from. And then you throw 34 brazen counts, which are misdemeanors, on the man who could beat him. And, this is like beyond Banana Republic. I mean, I don't think the Argentinians and the Nicaraguans and the other Hondurans and all, I don't think in their worst day were they this brazen. They made it look almost legal. These people are just doing it. And it's
Well,
probably
you bring up a good point, and I didn't mention this at the before we started the show. At the Harvard Club, at the bar, all right, there are two TVs,
mm,
all right.
mm,
The one on the left is usually CNN, usually, all right, and then the one on the right
captive
is
audience,
usually it's usually the local news, all right.
just like the airports. It's the only
All
way
right,
they get a crowd anymore.
so it was that Thursday when the verdict came out,
Yeah.
all right, and on my right side, it was surreal, John. It was literally surreal. Okay, I'm sitting there, I'm waiting for an event. All right. And I'm looking at CNN and the verdict is out. All right. And there's this cheering on the right side of the bar, a group of maybe 5 or 6 people, all right, of different nationalities, you know. One was Asian, some were guys, some were gals, some were white, some were Indian, but they all cheered. All right. Yeah, we got him, right? And then my left, all right, was actually the president of the club. Younger is his name.
Mm.
And he happens to be a lawyer. All right. And he was talking to another lawyer that used to be actually in JAG. All right.
Yeah. Military
Right.
lawyers, for people who
Right.
don't understand
Right.
military
Right.
counsel.
Right. Right. So they were talking, some legal stuff. Actually, it wasn't even related to the case. It was actually related to some sort of trial that they just wrapped up
Yeah.
for their practice. That was totally unrelated. So they weren't really talking about, what was going on with Trump. So I don't know really their reaction to it. And they
Mm.
were the lawyers, so they kind of like ignored it. But the non-lawyer types on my right side,
Yeah.
it was just so naive. It was just so orange
Childish.
man bad. He has to be bad, and anyone that's for him must be bad also. And it was just, I just like, I just felt
Binary
like,
thinking.
yeah,
He's a
yeah,
1 or he's a 0.
yeah. I mean, it's just, and they just kind of bought into that mainstream media, MSNBC, CNN.
I mean,
The
Goebbels, if he
players.
were alive, he would think, God, if only I had CNN and Fox and the legacy networks of the United States, we could have won the world.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
dumb it's made people. It's
No,
like
I
a
mean,
Big Brother hate session from Orwell's 1984. It's that bad.
you're right. Absolutely, absolutely. And
Big
this is,
Brother, and all of a sudden they're
it
like,
was,
oh,
yeah. So I
Big
mean,
Biden. Doesn't matter. He
yeah,
has no brain cells. He's Big Biden and the evil orange man.
right. So there is this, there's a big part of the United States that wants to demonize Trump supporters and Trump and a potential new administration.
Yep.
But there's this other side that actually is galvanizing because they see that there's a weaponization of the judicial system. And so there were many that were on the fence that may have not have voted for Trump in 2024, but most likely will
Yeah.
because they're pissed off at what they're seeing
Well,
with
and that gets
how,
back. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, through law, with
Yeah,
lawfare.
lawfare. Um, the that's why I was saying how things come back in reverse image. And what's happening is the rebellion. This gets into what's been reported today in the European Union parliamentary elections. A major tilt to the populist in all the elections. Um, it used to be called the Front National. The Le Pen people in France did did this amazing boost. It was so bad that Macron, the president, had to literally come up and when he saw the exit polls, and he said, "Okay, this is very heavy, but he basically immediately ordered the government to empty the parliament and start snap elections. The first wave in the 30th of June, the second wave on the 9th of July, I think, or the 7th of July. Now, we're also having this big mistake that Richie Sunak, the unelected prime minister, the non-prime minister, prime minister of the conservative regime that's running Britain, they're in such a bad mess that they were supposed to have the election in November, but he moved it up to July 4th.
Right.
Kind of a bad choice since that was the American Revolution Day, and maybe there's some British who want to join the revolution 248 years later. But no, dumb people, dumb. And then Starmer of Labor is an equally non-entity like Sunak. And he did this so that he could catch all the potential alternative parties, not giving them a chance to unite and get people elected, which of course they jumped on it like piranha. Um, um, Farage is all in his Reform Party. You've already got George Galloway, one of my great sources, who's there too. So rebellion is in the air, and what could happen is the British may go through a political transformation come 4th of July, and Macron is he's going to have elections for the French Parliament. He's going to say, well, if this is the way you want to go, okay. And you can see it was not the way he wanted to go, but it was surprising. He must know to what extent he's hated in France. I mean, they've been waiting for this blow, so he's had time to think about this. This is not just a sudden reaction. So, um, I think he must know that he may not even there. This is, I think, the parliament. If it really goes away, the other parliament in Europe went. Um, he won't have hardly any parliament representation, which means he can't govern. Which means Macron may resign, and we might have a presidential election. And I've always been saying for years, it's one of my most long distant prophecies. I've just stayed with it. It just seemed like it always had a chance, even though it seemed impossible. Marine Le Pen, will be the next French president. So it's different. Now you'll hear the press, the propaganda saying the extreme right, this extreme right. No, it's populist. It's people. The rebellion now, usually, I was saying a few hours ago that the liberals have been usually the initiators of our past revolutions. But now the karmic echo is coming to people they're going to have to redefine what extreme right is. It's not what happened before. It's people that and I see it a lot here in America. I mean, it's people that are not right-wing conservative people. I'm not that way. I just love the Constitution. I don't want my rights stepped on. And you will find as more and more people are saying, look, I don't like the Republicans. I don't vote Republican or Democrat now. I'm an independent, been for years. I've never voted for Trump and I never will. But I wouldn't also vote for an idiot like Biden or all these woke fools, wokeadilics, it's wokeadoodles. And then, or somebody like that strange creature that lives down in South Carolina as a senator, Lindsey Graham, who's openly defending, wants a nuclear war with Russia. How can that go bad? you know, when they're the bigger nuclear power with hypersonic weapons, literally, if Russia and America launched, even though Russia, it's odd that their weapons are now so fast that they would come out as Americans launched, they would launch their hypersonic Sarmats and other avant-gardes and other missiles and uh, their nuclear submarine torpedoes, the Poseidons. Um, even even if America was the first launch, before they got too far in the sky, all the Russian bombs would hit America. So even though they did not shoot first, the Russians will hit first if that happens. So they don't want that to happen. See, the Russians see their weapons as deterrents. They will use them if they are attacked. So this is the key thing that happened. Really, it was a whole new threshold at the end of May. I never that that is so beyond the pale, attacking early warning systems. My God, if we even thought about getting near one during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the missiles would have been flying. And so there's this lack of memory about what kind of devastation nuclear war will cause. And me, as a person studying prophecy, making prophecies, I Stormberger's prophecy in my book about the new Cold War, Stormberger's prophecy is very clear. He said, in the Third World War, he described in detail the First World War by literally talking about, well, when this village and that village in eastern Bavaria where he lived, an iron road is built there and an iron horse runs upon it. On that day, which happened to be August 1st, 1914, he's saying it in the late 1700s. It was transcribed before his death in 1820. So at least up to 1820, there hardly, I don't think there were any railroads really around then that much, like he was saying, and certainly not in these two objectifiable villages in eastern Bavaria, that when that rail, he had a vision of it with his cows. He's an illiterate cowherder. He had this vision. And he then related it later to before he died for Testament. And he said there'll be a world war that'll last 2 times 2 years, 4 years. 1914, 1918. August 1st, 1914, that railway was opened between Degendorf and this other place, two villages. And he said there'd be new weapons not seen in any war before. You would see weapons from the sky, airplanes, and also gas in the air, and great weapons that blow the earth. In the trenches in the Western Front, they were constantly at the Somme and other places because of all the miners on both sides, putting these huge explosions. It's like a whole mountain going off. And fortresses that move across the land, tanks. He said Germany in the Second War would be under the heavy leadership of the man with the Iron Cross, Hitler's Iron Cross. That was one of the things he said. He alluded to the Holocaust, he alluded to other things, and he kind of talked about the Cold War as well. But then he talked about the third, and he said in the Third World War, on the first day, more people will be snuffed out of life than all the wars put together. Just in the morning, first day. And with open eyes will the people of the world walk into these catastrophes. He's talking about all of us. All of us who listen to the stupid ass news, turning our brains into stupid assdom, getting a whole lie about what's going on, projecting lies on who would potentially be our enemies, and not at all helping us understand who Russian people are, the Chinese, how they work, what their real feelings are. No, that's anathema. We, in our world of projection news, we cannot dare let you know how we're leading you, we leaders of the West, unto your deaths. 2/3 of the human race will die in this war, said Nostradamus. Maybe he's not being too kind. It may be many more. So you're talking about 6 million gone. Well, this 8 billion that we have, 6 billion. So this war is caused by ignorance, by infantile leaders of the West. And Nostradamus, my next set of articles later in July, I'm going to look at century 9, quatrain 55, which is chillingly describing the West preparing a war against the East. It means in contemporary terms. And when they're doing it, as they're planning it, a year after, there'll be such a horrible plague that will come. Now, in other parts of Nostradamus's prophecies about plagues, he talks about these plagues being man-made. So I withheld publishing a book until I could find a climate in the world where people were open to hearing what really happened with COVID and what it's doing. So I wasn't going to waste all my effort putting a book out that would be immediately banned, and maybe my Amazon, all my books being banned. What's the point? There was no one. So I've been saying it surreptitiously in shows and all, but I had to wait a few years to find a climate where enough people were waking up from what the jab plague has been doing. And it's and how, with being careful here, because I understand there's still a lot of that. I still don't know for sure if I'll get banned, but I'm going to put it out anyway now this year. The cure, let's just simply say the cure was far more deadly than the disease. And now it's finally happening. You know, the Pope of vaccines, Mr. F, he's having to face the heat in congressional hearings. His tapes where he talked about how, oh, you know, this is what we do with people, you know. All these people, if you say, oh, you want to work for Amazon, I say, well, you got to get the VXX. Nostradamus's eye at what he was a master at in the world of his time as one of the most famous plague doctors of the 16th century. So around disease, a doctor, the things, I have all of his translated memories and about fighting the plague in this book. I start with that. And then from the focus of looking at the plagues of the past that he was right on, plagues, the present that he might have seen, surprisingly, I'm not somebody to easily project what I want to see with Nostradamus. That's why I've been doing this successfully for 50 years. Most people, I even have this guy every day that he writes whatever's going on in the world, he finds a way to make Nostradamus's verse perfectly fit it. So he's just wasting his life doing this. You can't do that with Nostradamus. You will then find what you're looking for, and if you don't get that lesson first, your whole career as a Nostradamian is a farce. And because you'll just be fooling yourself that Nostradamus can do no wrong, just like all the people who, like James Randi, made a career of it, who can only say that Nostradamus never got anything right. And well, he found that in the vagueness of Nostradamus very easily. But you have to kind of be aware of that before you really get into the scholarship of this. So, but what concerns me, so I was very surprised, certain things that came up in the study that I mean, where things were named, I even sourced it out in China. They were talking about a sloping park, a city of the sloping park. And I had a friend in Thailand and other people who had been to woo woo, I'll call it. the I'm going to tie a woo on. Um, and that city where it probably got released um, was has a park which is a whole Yangtze park. It's about 400. It's a sloping park. They call it the sloping park, and it's this new park, very beautiful. It's all along where all the riverboat junks used to be. Everybody goes there. So it's part of the confluence of all the rivers at all the main cities, and Wuhan being one of them is there. And then so it's talking about two cities of the slope park. Uh, well, the that were hit first really hard. Well, Wuhan's source. The other is a city that you're in. One of its boroughs is called Park Slope.
Yeah. Right.
Brooklyn area. I mean, Long Island. So where most of the rich and the people who run things live across from that. So it's kind of named there. The way he describes its spread from Milan, the Chinese New Year, and there are 100,000 clothing manufacturer people who went home and then came back to work from the Chinese New Year of 2020. And he said it will start in Wuhan, and he starts naming the cities in Italy, and then it goes to France. And he names them all in sequence. I'm like, oh my God. And then the other thing is he describes in detail the scab, the goose. And, no other, he was pictorial in what he saw in the future. So if you're putting that viral spiked thing on everything on TV as was happening, he describes it. He's describing that image. And it's so I was like, wow, uh, this was rare, but it's there. And the other thing I'm concerned about is there are many things that are involved perhaps in what causes two-thirds of the human race to fail, as he says. But the fact that he uses the term to fail in Old French, um, that can be an illusion, one of the Greek illusions that he uses as Renaissance people did. You can fail from dying from a wound in war. But it leans more towards two-thirds of our population over time dying from the cure
Mhm.
and the other consequences. So what you were going down on that road is just what I'm actually preparing, because I also had to wait and look at all the data that came after 2020 when I wrote the book. I had the premonitions, but now I didn't have the data. So, since I'm walking a tightrope here with the data and all, I have to have the data. So I had to wait 2 years and, using my own instincts of futurology, I knew that eventually these crimes against humanity would hatch out because they're too vast to be hidden.
Mhm.
And, this is even before turbo CA and CER started to happen. And again, there is sometimes the deep motivations of unconsciousness of us without more awareness. There's and this is going to get into weird woo-woo land of prophecy. And this period of time has always been a time where um a reckoning like this year, and more reckonings coming, is really expressing that the human race has reached a point of habitual unconsciousness that Osho, my teacher, saw back in the 80s. He said the world can no longer tolerate this unconscious human race. And especially so, it's not like animals being unconscious. These are creatures that are meant to become awakened, to be aware. And the critical mass of all the ego conditioning, all that is burying every child's Buddhahood and Christ consciousness into into a personality. And it's always been happening, but we passed a critical mass in the late 80s when we crossed 5 billion mark of the planet's. Native peoples of the world have been telling me that what it did is, at one point, it created an energy increase in the human race, but the human race is now more a multitudinously unconscious robotic people. I mean, I just say, just sit in the red light and look in the city at the people crossing and the people in the streets. Everybody's like, you know, it is the nature of people were to take their awakening, their Buddha nature, into this world and turn it into a paradise, to use a Buddhistic term. But the reality is, ego, the parents and everybody, for unconsciously, not their fault really. Everybody who sees you coming in say, well, we got to make you, educate you so you can survive here. But the education is about ego, division, under the illusion of separateness from others, that they're only waves and there's no ocean in them. There's no body. The body mind vehicle is not driven by a soul driver. It's driven by the car itself. You are the car. Now, you tell that to people and they stop driving on the freeway, and guess what happens? A lot of accidental, good and bad. I mean, and so there is a quality of this unconsciousness that people don't understand, is the more education you have, the more intellectual bling you have to play with, does not make you wise. And that is why I have yet to hear anyone who's very big proponent of AI that understands how stupid it is to call it that, because it's an oxymoron. Artificial reality. Why don't you just call it artificial reality? Well, reality can't be artificial. It's either real or it isn't. Artificial intelligence, fake intelligence. Uh, this is not intelligence. And because most people who are the people creating this, the Dr. Frankensteins who want to make their ego machine in their own image of ego, don't know that ego is a temporary phenomenon, and that you come into the world wise, and the society does not nourish that because it wants you to be an ego, an I. I mean, the word I in Greek is ego. And if you, for 21 days, just rather than saying I in any language, start to just say ego is happy, ego is sad, ego wants this, ego thinks this or that. It's amazing how it makes you think how much of what you are, as called education, is not a drawing out, as education means. It's a dumping in, burying the Buddha and the Christ consciousness inside of you, until you can almost forget it, or you start being so caught into looking for something like it that isn't it, because you are it. You came into it. You were born this. And so what that then means is that there is a deep, when so many people are living unconsciously and they don't even know it, they are spewing out into what is called we have an ecosphere, but we also have, in the more psychic sense, an ether sphere, where all our thoughts and emotions and things are like in a band around this planet, another dimension, that because we have overpopulated the world with a lot of people not living their potentials, all of that's starting to bleed out, just like the Ganges finally stopped being able to clean itself when tanners and everything were putting so much toxins in, and the loam of the Ganges was pretty amazing and capturing all that. Finally, even the Ganges gave up, and that's all that crap is coming into the water. It's just like what's happening in the oceans, and this is big. The idiots the green climate cultists don't get it, and they don't know how to fix it because they've never actually first done the first important thing, find out what the problem is. They've run around with their heads cut off, trying to make electric cars and this and that, and they don't even know what the problem is. The problem is CO2, methane, releasing too much, causing a positively negative feedback loop that creates more and more heat, and that's mostly stored in the ocean. Until about a year ago, the ocean, like the Ganges, is giving up its heat. It's giving up its 400,000 Hiroshima bomb blasts per annum. That heat, the ocean has embraced it, but now there are pools welling up. We are now, since this morning, in the 12th straight month of hotter temperatures for that month than any time before. The world is starting to heat up faster. As unfortunately, 30 years ago, I was saying, look, the people say it'll really get bad at the end of the century. I said, no, you're going to have to bring that way up closer. You're going to have to bring that up into the 2020s and 2030s, not 2080 or 2100. Because it takes a while for it to manifest. I mean, if I fart right now, the impact on global warming won't happen until 10 years from now. So if you have suddenly a whole boost of major production we've had going on right now, you'll see that hit around 2034. It'll manifest itself. We've already baked in 130-foot rise in the oceans. Even if we dropped all CO2 use, if we magically stopped it, this problem is going to be a 1,000-year project. It's not going to be solved in our lifetimes or in 10 generations. So we have to think more like the Chinese, not like the fast food American approach, which is not going to work. So that's what's so fortunate about the Chinese coming to their full powers as an economy and a society, is they're going to apply that issue the Chinese patient way of slowly fixing this problem, because we're not going to fix it overnight. We'll be too soon if we fix it in 1,000 years. That what we've set in motion with the industrial age. So the with this release of more emotions, more suppressed things, I've come into the theory that I call it the mind plague. Or now I'm calling it an essay that I'll write for my book of things to come, which is going to look at major themes of humanity: love, war, peace, politics, all that, and watch its evolution down the next 4,000 years. It's my way out there prophecy book. So I should better write it before I'm way out there myself as some kind of ash. So the point is that this is a period in the classroom Earth where the human race must evolve. It must evolve. But as the Hopi prophets said, and all, a majority of people aren't even aware of the fact that they're afraid of change, and they're afraid of going into an unknown new territory that humans must do, because what we know now and our habits around it is destroying us. And it is a crisis that probably many civilizations have gone through, and probably Fermi's paradox is right, that most don't make it. So there's a deep urge that people are unaware of. They don't want to grow to the next level. They're afraid of change. They're afraid of the new. They're afraid of what the Hopis call the coming of the fifth world. We've done this 4 times before, so they say. And then a new race is born and then it spreads again. Well, the 2020s are the beginning of the Hopi fourth turning. All the prophecies have been, the final warnings have been fulfilled. So it's now that it's a purification by fire. Is this fire, the fire can be the fire of awakening consciousness, the fire of love, or it can be the fire of global warming, or the fire of thermonuclear war. So the human race, the problem is the vast majority of people will never grow consciously in their lives. Not that they don't want to. If they knew about it, even they knew about it, they won't, because the system is set up not to help that to happen. And it's kind of always been that way, but it's more important now because no, we always had jerks and people in the world when there were a few million to 100 million to a billion in 1800. And well, I used to say to my mom, the problem isn't that people are worse than they were in the past. There's just too many of them doing the same thing, multiplying the darkness. And so what power does darkness have? It can cover most of the body of the universe with little stars around it. It's vast. Darkness is endless. But darkness, if you light a little candle, all that darkness can do nothing to put that candle out. So this metaphor is about this, the difference between vast darkness. So unconsciousness is like darkness. It exists in mass mob-ishness. If you ever want to see human beings acting in a very unconscious way, watch what happens to mobs. When people get lost in a crowd of people going off to do this or do that, you have, or it's like all the girls screaming in Beatles concerts, and they're just like melting down, and it's just pure hysterics. The Beatles were so shocked by it. That's why they stopped doing concerts. That's why I said, we're just going to go in the studio and make music. We don't want to do, no one's listening to us. They're all going, that's unconsciousness, very active in Yankee Stadium back in the 60s, late 60s. So unconsciousness is a quantity. It's an endless quantity. However, it is counterbalanced because the metaphor of the candle. If all the darkness in the universe cannot put out a candle, that tells us that the light of the candle is a quality of consciousness. So I'm writing a lot about this now and talking about it more and more than I ever did before, because we are on the razor's edge this year, especially. If we get through the summer, that'll be something. We probably will, because I've seen this coming since I was my 7th-year birthday, when I had the premonitions about a few days before that about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And as a boy in the last days of his 6th year on Earth, I was having to confront very adult shocks that were coming to me, that I started seeing thermonuclear war as it is, not as a child. And it changed me. It made me interested in world events since I've been 7, and history, and I've studied history like a doctor studies a pathology. And it's not that I love the pathologies I'm constantly confronted with. Mr. Alzheimer's didn't love Alzheimer's disease. Mr. Parkinson's didn't like Parkinson's disease. He was trying to find a cure. I don't like wars, and plagues and all this stuff, but I'm engaged in it like a doctor's engaged trying to find out how to cure this problem, if there's a possibility. And so the repetition of history is something that fascinated me. And then I started getting into prophecies and religions, and I saw the future history making the same patterns. So the thing to do, it gets back to what I started this unexpectedly, these hours of talking. It gets back to that which never changes, that which you can only engage in the eternity of the presence, is the antidote to this mind plague, this zombie plague. There really are zombies, by the way. In my book, it's kind of funny about it. I say zombies, why we're fascinated with zombies is because we are zombies. Most of us live our lives at 1/10, if we're that lucky, of our capacity. Um, we're not living 9/10 or 10/10. We're just robotically going through our lives, dead before we're in our graves by decades. If you can start seeing that, it changes. It drops on its own accord, because when you're in the moment, you're not feeding it anymore. That's the hypothesis of meditation, which is a subjective science that uses exactly the same scientific method. It can. You have a hypothesis, you have to test it. My hypothesis is that I'm not just having a chemical reaction in my brain making all this up. It may be that, but the other thing it may be is that there's something beyond the brain, that there's something that seems to take note of things that, if it was all just lost in the changeability of stuff and wasn't a little distance there, one would not notice that, oh, I'm now getting old. Uh, I was young before. Now I'm approaching death, when everything was rising the other way. But there's something that's you've become aware of that I remember when I was a child. It was there just as it is today. And it's still here. It hasn't changed, and yet it's always new. So to me, that is the light of the candle against all this darkness. And if I'm correct in this, that there has been a great experiment that many 20th century mystics, two of which I knew, Krishnamurti and my teacher Osho, um, have looked back at this idea that what's needed in the world is 200 more people that become awakened to their full potential than the average that are usually walking the earth and living on the earth. 200 more, maybe only that many enough. That's required to stay the hand of devastation. If what I'm saying has some truth, here's what's going to happen in all the many things we've talked about today that seem to be human ending events: nuclear war, global man-made plagues. All of these are gestures of, I don't want to move any further. I'm in an existential crisis. It's like the human race is now in puberty and it wants to jump off a cliff because things are changing and it doesn't want to go. That's, this is a suicidal feeling is there in the human race. It's not conscious. If it were conscious, you could see it and transcend it, but it's there. I see it in people. It is their dream they dare not look at. But the whole world, from the great to the small, have deep inside them this fear of, like puberty, I'm changing whether I like it or not. And they're afraid of it, and they will do things to commit auto-human suicide. The old humanity, my teacher used to call it, is desperately, unconsciously seeking to annihilate itself. It's afraid. And like the Hopi prophecies say, they will mostly drop dead from their own fear of change. But the minority of people who are boldly stepping into the new, the unknown, who have the courage and the intelligence, they will move on. But if what I'm saying is true about the 200, Osho would be asked, "What are the 200 already here?" And he'd go, yes. Now, Osho would only answer a question according to how you asked it. And the person didn't ask the question with more awareness. This is what I would have said. Osho, are not only the 200 here, but are all 200 of them remembering their awakening? Have they already remembered? It would be interesting to hear what you would have to say with that. Because, so if they are awakened, if we have 200, because here's where the crisis helps. There's where that strange, the quiver I was talking about, how the dissonance is a friend of the harmony. It makes something in between, which is beyond both. These dark times and these threats are scaring a lot of people, and they're scaring a lot of people to really look hard at reality in ways that they hadn't before, because there's also another side of humanity, the survival mechanism. We don't want to be destroyed. So that's getting activated. These times are eventually going to force a lot of people to start looking at stuff that in more sleepy, nice, cuddly, warmy times they would never look at. When all their goals and stuff are shattered. I mean, just myself, I have all these projects that are rich and wonderful, and I'm facing the fact that this may all be gone the next day, more than it's ever been before. So I keep writing them, but I'm also aware of it may just all go, which is true of anybody's life. But because of an unusually dark or intense time, it magnifies people's attention to either go suicidal or look at themselves in a way they never looked at before and be transformed. So as much as the energy is dark there to create destruction of humanity, there's an equal amount of light that is being attended to. People are being shocked, forced by the circumstances to either go mad, self-destructive, or look at their true nature that isn't this. And that so these times actually create more of a possibility of an extra 200 people getting enlightened than more happier times, more easy times. So this alchemy, it's just like coal. I've said this before on the show. It's like darkness is like all this coal that's trying to pressure on itself. And why? It doesn't know why. It just can't help it. It's press. And suddenly in the middle of it, diamonds. It turns into diamonds. So diamonds can't be created without the pressure. And humanity can't evolve without the crises being global on many levels. And the other thing is that a whole lot of the world is actually going towards something really beautiful right now. This community of sovereign nations with a money system that will not cause them to be blackmailed or sanctioned. And of course, the one side, the 500 years of the West that's been running the world like that, with America being the crystallizing worst part of it. They're seeing their world disappear. And that's another problem that, if I can't control the world anymore, I'll take it down with me. I've got the bombs. That motivation is also that kind of cathartic. Well, fuck you all people. Boom. Well, but in fact, we didn't get to Scott's thing, but Scott talked about this. And I will at least share this one thing he said. And if you guys want to hear his whole transcript of the day before he got stopped from going to Russia. Although, by the way, he was in one, they put him online. He was in a New York studio and he got to get to be a guest on one of the two panels that he was supposed to be on. And it was wonderful. So they didn't completely censor him, and he was brilliant on it. Anyway, he talked about there was a certain nuclear doctrine, and he had a guy named Polk, who was William Polk, who actually was with Kennedy, a close aide during Cuban Missile Crisis and all that. So he got it from this source that every president has the guys that are head of nuclear deterrence and all that. They always come to the president and they hand him this thing he's got to sign. And what often happens, I think Polk heard it the same as much as Scott related the story. He was like, Kennedy was saying, "This is insane. You can't make me do this. I can't do this. This is absolutely insane and horrible." And what it was is there was this idea, you kind of hear jokes about it in Dr. Strangelove. And he says, well, if we have our own bombs down in the caves, we will not have a cave gap. We'll come out of the caves as the dominant, whatsoever left of civilization. We have to have the most dominance of what's left. So, Scott was talking about how, okay, the launch happens. The idea is that if 30% of America survives, or 40% of America survives, and if only 30% of Soviet or the Russians survive, there's a big problem. India's got 80%. So this is literally a situation where if we launch on everybody. So that when we come out of our caves, India has been reduced to 10%, China 10%. Any threat that could end up, not just all the world, but just those countries that China, India, you know, the, Russia. So, so he's saying I have to sign to bombing, all the countries, that have the potential of nuclear capability and all that. And Kennedy was freaking out. This is mad. And but what would happen is they keep working on them each year, and finally every president signs off, you know, hopefully reasoning that, well, better heads will happen. And since Khrushchev and I were able to talk to each other and backtrack this mistake, this terrible thing we set into motion with the Cuban Missile Crisis, maybe, I just hope that it doesn't get to that point. Frankly, I'm glad that Scott's talking about it because the whole world should know this is the plan. So I always wondered because I was just writing about it when it was time to do the show and editing when I was saying I do these insertions in this long discourse he's giving. And I always wondered because Scott is wonderfully ebullient. He's such an open-hearted, wonderful man. And he's a Marine. He definitely, but he just said, well, it's going to happen. And you know what? You're all going to die. It doesn't matter. I mean, he said, oh, well, I've got a gun. I'll survive. And he says, yeah, but you go outside, you're going to hunt in the radioactivity, you're going to die. Oh, well, I got wood. I can keep warm. He says, oh, yeah. Are you going to walk out and be chopping wood as the radioactive dust is falling on you and your campfire? You're going to die. You're all going to die. And and so, but even his Jeff, I'm talking about Ask the Inspector, by the way, everybody. Just go on Rumble and type in Ask the Inspector or go to scottritter.com. And it's Ritter, Ritter, and all of his shows are there. This website's now got a new website where you can see all the different things he's doing. He's one of my oldest sources. We don't know each other, but I've been quoting him and sourcing people to him since 2002. He's the guy that was the inspector of Saddam Hussein's nukes and weapons of mass destruction. He and his teams for years were the people who found it all and documented it all. And he came out just before the war started in 2003 in March, and he went to the Congress and hearing and said, look, I know where they are. We got them all. And if there are any left of the chemical weapons, they're all neutral now because you can only have chemical weapons for a time before they're just goo. They don't do anything. So he doesn't have weapons. So, here's Scott, this one guy, former Marine intelligence officer, major, who then uh, also went to when the INF treaty was created at the end of the 80s, he to banish all intermediate range missiles, nuclear missiles. He went to some of the Abatinsk or one place where they build the SS-22s. He was there to watch the breaking up of these missiles as Soviet groups were sent to America to also watch the shipping back to America and breakup of Pershing 2 missiles. So these highly unstabilizing missiles, made, and so the treaty, which Trump broke, and Bush, the ABM treaty, we basically at the start of this century erasing all the treaties that protect the future of human beings from nuclear bombs. Is it any wonder that we had a second Cold War and we're stepping into a third World War? Thank you, George W. Thank you, Donald J. Trump. I mean, a lot of things I like about Trump. I wrote a whole book about this, his astrology, his amazing astrology, and it's one of the most accurate books I ever wrote. Saw how he'd win, upset, and all that. Um, you know, um, there are some people. I love my father, my late father. He reminds, and when I saw George Bush and his when he's just interacting off from being president, he reminds me a lot of my father. I love my father, but he's the last man on the planet Earth that would ever make a president of the United States. There's a lot of things I love about Trump, but he's a wide open channel and he doesn't know it. He's a very powerful channel. You put anything in front of him, he'll channel it. Put a bunch of white supremacists, he'll go racist. You put black people, he'll be best friends and doing the same thing. And there are people in the deep state that know what I know how to manipulate him. It's the last guy that should be, let's set the record straight. Fortunately, Trump did not start and did not want to start a war and be the next president since God knows how many presidents in modern American history who just do constant war. And he succeeded. But ladies and gentlemen, it was a pure accident of luck because, the guy with the walrus mustache, Bolton, was somehow he stupidly chose him to be his national security head. He nearly started World War III in June of 2019 with Iran by almost convincing Trump to they set up a situation where they had a big drone, U.S. drone, go into Iranian airspace around the Strait of Hormuz, highly sensitive area for them. And for hours, it was flying around in Iranian airspace, and warnings were not heeded, and they shot it down. And so the recourse was, Bolton's idea was to kill the 195 Iranians running that missile battery. And of course, that they didn't understand where that was going, and Bolton didn't care. I mean, he's as Trump himself said, this guy wants to fight everybody. But he's the same guy who would listen to him. So he'll have that truth come out. But so anyway, Trump in the last minute pulled it back because he finally reasoned after I think some other Pentagon people told him to what extent the whole Middle East would erupt, that Iran being struck on his territory, they would launch everything they've got. Every oil rig in the area would be ash from the war. The world would have a collapse of its economy from the oil that it needs. And America couldn't even a year, if they got all the resources in to attack Iran conventionally, wouldn't win. So he then mused with the lips, why do we have to kill people because a robot plane was shot down? That's what he said, and he stopped it. But that was one of two times. The other one, he didn't heed anything right. He went after this idea that Soleimani was this evil guy of the Iranian who was going to start some terrorist event. Never happened because he wasn't. He was the man who defeated ISIS more than the Americans ever did. In fact, CIA even honored him the year before and says, yeah, without you, this wouldn't have happened. And they also murdered in his motorcade the chief and popular Iraqi general who was his general patent to Soleimani's Eisenhower. These are the people that lost 35,000 men killing ISIS in Mosul and really defeating ISIS and stamping it out. And by the way, I must add, a lot of those guys are still in service. And if the Hezbollah thing goes off, there you're going to see 200,000 Iraqi militia backing up the 150,000 Hezbollah going in to take northern Israel. That's what's looming if they go all out. So, and that will mean the collapse of Israel. I wanted to get this in. There's so many things I didn't get in, but it's so important to know this, that even before Ukraine, we didn't even touch Ukraine much in this one. even if you go, even if Ukraine will it's very likely the way things are going that it's a greater chance that Ukraine will outlive Israel if if this thing with Hezbollah happens. It will make the devastation of Israel will be so complete that if that as the diaspora is already beginning, I calculated in my last Hogue prophecy report that the number now is of permanent Israeli citizens with dual passports that have left Israel and don't plan to come back is over 400,000. And when you have 7 million Jews, that is a big hunk of people. And as a small country, the whole the whole myth or the whole illusion that has been that, we're strong, we can be in the sea of angry neighbors, and we can live in security and peace. And what's happening is Israel's turning into a nightmare. There's a whole lot of people in the south and the north that have been displaced for a half a year. I don't know how that will affect Netanyahu's vote. Maybe that will throw him out. But then who else? Gantz? They have nothing else to do in the refugee camps. They were listening to Gantz. They know how Gantz is not going to get it together. Netanyahu will stay in because he's the last guy that gets them all together and in a quorum. So we'll see if that happens. But I may be wrong. But so this Israel is turning into a more dire place to live, uncertain place to live. And one thing the diaspora of 2,000 years has taught the Jewish people is survive. So it's coming closer and closer, Israel, to being a place where the tribe needs to pull up stakes and go somewhere else. And whether the Zionists in power like it or not, I am seeing the end of Israel coming from people just leaving. They just leave because it's dangerous, and we will survive. And so at a certain point, there won't be enough Jewish people in Israel to run the country. And the country will then simply cease to be from people leaving because it's no longer a place that's safe and secure and peaceful. It's always constantly looking over your shoulder at 400 million Arabs and 81 million Iranians. I mean, it's such a toxic situation. I sometimes think that it may even be in some way a collective trauma from the Holocaust and many other Holocausts and things that have happened to Jews over the centuries. That is kind of a collective, not quite psychologically seeing it, that it's like a PTSD for the Jewish race that has gone through so much in the last 2,000 years. But now it's self-destructive. So this may happen. I hope it can be resolved. My idea is to see Palestinians and Jews live in one country with equal rights. And I think no matter where it goes, if it has any future, that's the only future it has. The two-state solution is dead. It was not a good idea anyway. What has to happen is the Palestinians and the Jews must live as equally respected people. Nobody's equally unique, not nobody. These are the master race, the seed of Abraham against the untermenschen race of Abraham. This is not what the Bible says. And the 3 or 4 opening messages of God to Abraham, according to the Bible. And he got those messages when there was no Isaac. He had not been born. So only the Arab seed was flourishing in Ishmael. I think Ishmael was a teenager when he got the first big messages that Eretz Israel, the lands given to the chosen people, were meant, and I quote from it, for all of his seed. That's what it said, all of his seed. That means the Arabs too. And I still say the best thing I hope will happen is that Israel will be replaced by a nation called the seed of Abraham. Whatever Hebraic way that sounds. and then that all the seed of Abraham will live in peace and respect with each other and tolerance. Um, Coexistence is a very ugly state of being. It is means we hate each other's guts, but we will pretend to be civilized. I mean, there's a wonderful card in the Osho Zen Tarot deck, which is called um, Compromise. These two samurai warriors who hate each other, but they're well known. The whole community of samurais are watching them, and they're all standing. And the most they can do is touch the other guy's little fingertip like that. And then if it, oh, that's coexistence. Thank you, thank you. It's just pretense crap. What they want to do is pull out their swords, go at each other. And so that's what's going on in Palestine and Israel right now for a long time, since 48 and before. It's these periods of coexistence and then murdering each other. So it's got to end. And so there's a situation, the sign of where something must evolve or it destroys itself. That's what's happening in the Middle East. But at the same time, in Iran and Saudi Arabia, they've changed their enmity. So both things are happening. I would never dream that the Iranians and the Arab Peninsula would bury the hatchet. They did in one weekend with the Chinese, who are not into this kind of stuff. Should send the Chinese to other war areas to solve the problem, but then that would end the military-industrial complex. More business would die again. That's exactly why the neocons were created. They went, we just won. We got peace. This is terrible news. Where's the chaos and perpetual disorder that allows us to prepare for war, contain wars that we concoct? Because just like what's going on with the sickness industrial complex, make a lot of money killing people in the name of peace, in the name of health.
So,
Ta-da!
right, so we'll have to end it there. It's been 3
I don't
hours.
even know
A
what
little bit
time it
more
is. Oh
than
my
three.
God, it's 10 o'clock.
Yeah, a little bit more than 3 hours. But I want to remind the audience, please click the link in the description box of this video and all the videos I've done with John. That link will take you to his website. You can sign up for his periodicals. You can also sign up for a reading. I've done a reading. It's interesting. You'll learn a lot. So, please go to the website, help support John. And also, because of some of the things that we did say in this video, the full unedited version will be on Rumble, Bitchute, and Brighteon, and an edited version will be on YouTube. So thank you, John, for being the scholar you are, and it's very interesting to hear from your perspective. And
I'm always surprised what I say. So I'm also in the audience.
well, the thing is it's a nice free flow conversation, and I'm glad that we were able to talk a little bit about kind of the similarities between nuclear war and what we went through with the crisis in 2020. And for the ones, also please go to Amazon to purchase your book. What was the title again? It was the
Well, it's not published yet.
Oh, okay.
Because I had to hold it off, but later this year it'll be out. Also, an update of my book Nostradamus and the Antichrist, codenamed Mabus, will also be coming out, especially around October, I hope, because of a commentary potential that's happening, which is part of the famous prophecy about Mabus, the third Antichrist, that could we might have it makes sense with everything that's portentous going on in our world, that we might see a great comet in all this, the brightest comet of 1812 or something like that, before Napoleon went to Russia. They're harbingers of change. And so I'm going to try to release it in September, so that when the comet, mid-September, when it's out.
My understanding, there was a comet also right before the plague of 1665.
Of which was 1665?
65. I thought there was a comet right before or right after 1665.
Well, Nostradamus described the comet, and how he described it was exactly what happened in 1577. when it came.
Huh.
So I don't know how he does that. I mean, the
Uh,
more I get into this stuff, the more don't know how it happens. So it's just don't ask the millipede to try to walk on 500 legs with a effort of his mind. He'll fall over. And the bunny asked the millipede, "Wow, Mr. Millipede, how do you do that?" He said, "Well, I've never thought about it." I go, "Oh." He says, "You damn bunny, you messed up my day. Now I don't know how to walk."
right. So,
Prophecy's a lot like that. You don't know how to walk, you just do it.
right. Well, I enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure the ones that will get to see the videos on the different channels will also. So please, the individuals that are watching, click the link and go to John's website and help support him. So thank you for being on the channel, John. So say goodbye to everybody so I can stop.
Goodbye to everybody.
All right, very good. All right, let me stop the recording here.